Good morning, Internet. It is March 14th, 2019, and today we're going to talk about something that you don't say, but deep inside, you already know. Today we're going to talk about why telling a child that they have to go to college no matter what is bad advice. But it's hard to break that cycle because our entire lives we are told that the only way we can achieve success in this world is to go to college. That if you don't go to college, that your only option will be to ask, would you like fries with that? It's very interesting. I've recently finished reading Weapons of Mass Instruction by the late, great John Taylor Gatto, and in that book, he goes over the plethora of uber successful people who did not go to college, were college dropouts, the very platforms that we rely on every day. Mark Zuckerberg, for example, on Facebook, college dropout, and the list goes on and on and on. In fact, the notion that a child has to go to college to achieve success in life is a relatively new concept. I said in the stream yesterday, Thomas Jefferson was running a plantation when he was 12 years old. Ben Franklin was the editor of a statewide newspaper when he was 13 years old. But let's talk about why going to college is bad advice, at least as blanket advice. It's not that you can't find success by going to college. To the contrary, you can be very successful from going to college. But just telling a child that the path to success is to go to college, as the school system indoctrinates people into believing, well, that can be damaging advice that by the time a child understands why it's damaging, it can be too late. Because in the United States of America, one of the only debts that you can't file for bankruptcy for is college debt. So let's go to the big board, because I always like to point out the fork in the road. And if you know any young people, high school people, I would tag them in this podcast, in this episode, because you want them to understand the choices that they have in front of them. And unfortunately, school guidance counselors don't properly articulate the ramifications of the choices that young people are making. And that's really tragic, and perhaps the reason for that is many school administrators came through the same system of indoctrination. They were told from the time they were little that the only path to success is to go to college. That if you go to college, you make more money. That could be true, but it's not necessarily true. And then there's the other aspect of that. What is your money to debt ratio? And that is what college, or I guess high school guidance counselors, should be talking to young high school students about. But that conversation's not happening, so let's have it today. This week, a big scandal broke. The college admissions scandal. Now, I don't know why this is a scandal, because I thought this was the most blatantly obvious scandal that we've had in America in quite some time. But basically what we found out is many rich and powerful people, including famous people. I believe the most famous person caught up in this scandal was the woman from Full House. Forgive me, but I'm really not that interested in Hollywood actors and actresses, and I didn't care what her name was before the scandal, and I certainly don't care what it is now, but Lori something. Anyway, and what we found out is that the rich and powerful were using bribes. They were paying test administrators to allow third parties to take tests for high school students so that the grades would be very high and they would look good, obviously applying to college. The same concept, bribes, but to have third parties take tests in just the regular school setting. Again, so the grades would be really high and it would look good in a college resume. And then they were bribing sporting coaches at the universities, as well as photoshoppers, to make it look as if students who weren't athletes were actually world-class athletes. This way, it would be easier for them to get into college, and of course, they'd be able to probably get in a scholarship. I haven't even heard that angle, but my guess is that would be the case as well. So the only money that would have to be paid out is the actual bribes to the universities. Now, this is obvious. We see legacy children getting into school all the time. If you look at our president, most of the presidents of the United States were actually C students. Most of the people in government are C students. You go to John McCain, you can go to George Bush and John Kerry. It's all well documented that these people did very poorly in school, and the list goes on and on and on. So it was always obvious to me that with legacies and with the children of the ultra-rich getting into Ivy League schools, that was more about social status. That was more about who could pay for what. A great example would be David Hogg. David Hogg was a student at the Parkland, Florida High School. He had average grades, but of course, that was the high school that famously, earlier within a year, there was unfortunately a school shooting in Parkland, Florida. And after the school shooting, the political establishment, they used David Hogg. They had him leading these rallies, calling for gun control. They protected him, so they used him as their lapdog. He would go out and attack, saying that we need gun control in America, and anyone who criticized him would be viciously attacked by the media because they would say, how can you attack a student who attended a high school that was just shot up, you monster? Well, what was the price of what David Hogg was doing? He was clearly being used as a propagandist. His grades weren't very good at all. I mean, he was a C student in high school, let alone college. Well, he got into Harvard. So if you play ball with those who are politically connected, those who are financially connected to the oligarchy, well, you get into Harvard. And if you read books like Tragedy and Hope, you know that these big universities, Harvard and Oxford, they actually serve as the recruiting ground for the oligarchy. And that's why you always hear about secret societies. That's why when Bush ran against Kerry, you heard about the story broke. Wait, they're both in this secret organization, the Skull and Bones? Yes, because the big universities are recruiting grounds for the oligarchies that actually run society. So finding out that the rich and powerful had back doors, or as it was worded in these court documents, side doors into getting into universities, well, to me, that actually wasn't a scandal. That was just common sense 101. Now let's talk about the real college scandal. I wish someone told me about the real college scandal. The bigger scandal. And this is where we go to our fork concept. You tell your child, you have to go to college. No matter what, you have to go to college and chase your dream, whatever you're interested in. That's your path to success. And then your child goes to elementary school and the teacher says, well there, Johnny, you have to go to college because that's the only way you can be successful in life. And then your child gets to middle school and they say, I had friends that didn't go to college, and the only thing they have to say now is, would you like fries with that? And then little Johnny gets to high school, and their teacher says, you better do good on your test to go to college, otherwise you're going to be a garbage man. But what the teacher doesn't tell you is that the garbage man makes more money than the teacher. But this is the messaging that children get their entire lives, that you have to go to college. And at one time, that was very good advice. Let's talk about what college was. There was a time where there was a price for college. I'm just throwing numbers out there. Don't quote me on this. I'm paraphrasing, so to speak. Maybe in the 1970s. And let's say college cost $2,000 a semester. You would go to college for your $2,000 a semester, and maybe you would take out loans, or maybe you would work your way through college. Little strap up your boots, the old American rugged individualism. And there would be a certain value that you would get back based on the college. The college said, this is our tuition, and this is the value that our tuition gives to you. So if you go to college, let's say something simple. If you go to college to be a teacher, you're $2,000 a semester. Once you get hired as a teacher, the value will exceed the cost of going to college. And this was well understood. Going to college made a lot of sense, and the advice, go to college is the path to success, made a lot of sense. So what changed? Why is that not the case today? Why is the cost to value ratio of going to college different today? Well, the answer is maybe some kind-hearted people and some people who are much more sinister started pushing the narrative that everybody had to go to college, that it was a right to go to college, and that they had to make sure that every single high school student could afford college. Of course, when you do that, the natural takeaway is, doesn't 12th grade just become 13th grade, which is college? But it does something to our cost to value ratio, because the government started approving, or legislation started making it so that the government would give out grants and scholarships, and they made sure that every person, so to speak, could afford to go to college. So all of a sudden, all of these students who are very poor, from inner cities or whatever reason, for scholarships from anywhere, started getting all of this government money. And here's what happened. As the government started to pay for everyone's college, or the taxpayer, I should say, the cost of college would go up and up and up, because the universities knew that when they jacked up, if they took their tuition and said it's $2,000, they said, you know what, this semester it's going to be $3,000. And while people in the free market said, okay, well, maybe I'll look to a university, people who were getting these college scholarships and federal grants, federal money from the government, they didn't care. They just took the money, plus they have the indoctrination. So the government would pay the university the $3,000. So the university said, okay, well, you know, maybe next semester our tuition will be $6,000. And the government would pay the university the $6,000. So the university came along and said, maybe next semester our tuition will be $12,000. And the government would come along and pay that tuition. So eventually $12,000 became $20,000, became $30,000, became $50,000. And now we have the situation we're in today, where going to college requires taking out $100,000, probably at least, of loans. Far cry from the $2,000. You say inflation, but the inflation of the cost of college has gone up much faster than inflation in our society. So what is the result of that? Because the government stepped in and started giving this federal money, the cost of college went up and up and up. But the value of the degrees didn't go up and up and up. So the cost to value ratio changed. So whereas the advice before the government stepped into helping people go to college, the cost to value was there. There was a cost, there was a free market, and you get a certain value that made it worth going to college, whatever you majored in. But because that cost to value ratio changed, now only certain majors make it worth going to college. So proper advice to a young child would be, you have to understand the cost to value ratio of going to college. If you go to college and you major in social work or women's studies, well, the job you get when you get out of college is probably going to pay you, if you can get a job, maybe $40,000 a year. Is it worth it to take out $100,000 to $150,000 in debt that you'll have to pay back when you're making $40,000 a year? Or should you put your capital into something else? Now, take the same child and you say, go to college. I have a friend who went to college. He was actually homeschooled. I went to Cortland University with him, but he was homeschooled throughout middle school and high school. And he majored in chemical engineering. the cost to value ratio is worth it if he's majoring in chemical engineering. But when you're telling a child to go to college, the most important thing they have to understand is the cost to value ratio. What is it going to cost? How much debt are they going to be in? And what value does that degree give you? How much money are you going to make from that degree when you get out of college? Now, I always say when we raise our children, there should be a major focus on everything they do in teaching them to not look to work for money. That they should look to start businesses and be their own boss. And you should make sure they have a talent stack, a set of skills that makes that easy for them. Whether that be understanding marketing, understanding sales, building things with their hands. There's a number of skills that a person can develop. And the way Scott Adams would describe this, very successful man himself, is that the more skills or talents you develop in your child, the higher likelihood that they will be able to find success. So make sure they're good at marketing. Make sure they're good at sales. Make sure they're good at building things with their hands. Make sure they're good at accounting. Make sure they're good at playing music. Because the more skills they have, the more likely it is, the bigger talent stack they have, the more likely it is they'll be able to find something that makes them successful in the world. So you have to make sure when you're advising a child that they understand the cost to value ratio. An example of how the government stepping in destroyed that cost to value ratio is the big pharmaceutical companies. If you could get through all the political mumbo jumbo of people not understanding what's happening in front of their eyes, a few years back we saw the big push for Obamacare, right? What nobody talked about, because the Republicans pretended to be against Obamacare, but they were actually for it, and there's a reason for that. What nobody talked about is the big driver behind Obamacare was the big pharmaceutical industry. The same one I spoke about yesterday, drugging our children and trying to get government officials to be mandated to go into new parents' homes to give health screenings. Because Big Pharma pushed Obamacare. Why did they do that? The cost to value ratio. Because they have their drug and it costs $1,000. Well, once the government has taken over the insurance industry, they say, okay, our drug, it was $1,000, now it's $1,500. And the government pays for it. And I say, oh, now it's $3,000. And the government pays for it. And then farmer goes, okay, the drug, it costs $6,000 now. And the government pays for it. And this is why Big Pharma, relentlessly with their lobbying, pushes for the government takeover of the health insurance industry. It's why you see them pushing for single payer now. Because Big Pharma knows they can drive the prices up, up, and up. And in the end, by the way, we're paying for it just through our taxes. Just people don't understand how these cycles work. It's the same thing that happened with the cost to value ratio in college. This is basic economics. This is basic understanding of political lobbying. Unfortunately, most of us went to public school and just can't quite figure it out. Something else happened when that cost to value ratio changed. You had the cost to value ratio change, plus you had the affirmative action. And what affirmative action essentially did is you took Asian students with 98 grade point averages who are highly, highly competent people who would no longer get into college. They would get denied going to college because instead there were these quotas of affirmative action. So now instead of an Asian student being a 98 student getting into college, now you had students who were 74 students in high school of other races getting into college in their place. Not quite fair to the Asians now, is it? So that 74 student would get into college, but the problem was when this happened, they kept failing out when the program first got administered. So what the colleges started doing is said, okay, we'll dumb down the curriculum. So the colleges would actually, as a result of affirmative action, started making the curriculum easier, easier, and easier. So now the difficulty of a college curriculum today is the difficulty of a 9th grade curriculum 50, 60 years ago. So the value you're getting from your college education is way down, and that's why it's very important that the cost to value ratio is understood when you're talking to your child about going to college. Don't just say you have to go to college no matter what, that's your path to success. That is terrible advice. And I got into it already with all majors versus select majors. You want to tell them be a chemical engineer or something along those lines. Even someone like Mike Cernovich, who's an attorney himself, a very successful attorney, was talking about how even the cost of going to law school today is so inflated that for the overwhelming majority of even attorneys, the cost to value ratio just isn't worth it. So this has to be understood before you give blanket advice about telling someone to go to college. So, as you know, I'm making my pivot. I am helping parents, empowering parents, and being the best them they can be so that they can empower their children to live better lives and be independent. I'm going to be pivoting, and eventually the only place I am going to be posting is on my other YouTube channel. Once I build it up, is going to be Classical Learner. I just posted the link right there. If you can please click on that link and subscribe to that channel and click the bell, as well as my Classical Learner Facebook page. I'm on Patreon if you wanted to support me that way. So I thought this was an important topic. I think it's something that everyone in society needs to understand, but very few people do. So let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, thank you for tuning in. Together, we could build a better world. As always, power to the individual, and long live liberty.